So in my speech, I'll be first giving a few pieces of framing, and then I'll be moving on to our team's arguments. First is on moral responsibility, and second is on upholding the values of the Olympic Games. So first, some few pieces of framing, right? We define crimes as first, human right abuses, and second, things like war crimes, and third, violating international agreements. We think that this results from the faults of the nation and in situations where the nation is responsible. And then what is the purpose of the Olympic Games and the Olympic values, right? Because there are three core values of the Olympic Games. It is first, excellence, second is respect, and third is friendship. A country guilty of international crime does not fulfill any of this criteria, right? And the Olympic Games should act as a beacon for international integrity. And a quick clarification, we think that this does not mean that their athletes in the country cannot participate at all, right? It's just that the country that committed these crimes cannot participate. For example, a figure skating participant became a coach for China in this year's Olympics, and we think that this can also apply to other many examples, right? I was saying this is very important as you can still give the athlete a recognition, and you don't have to let them take the consequences of their countries and the decisions that their country makes, right? But moving on to our team's arguments. Our first argument is on moral responsibility. Few layers of analysis. First of all, the Olympics serve as a beacon of human rights. The Olympic Games are more than just a showcase of each country's athletic performances. They represent the ideals of mutual understanding, fair play, and respect for human rights. When a country is found guilty of crimes against humanity, actions that involve widespread and systemic abuse of human beings, it is shown as a disregard for these principles. By banning such countries from the Olympics, we reinforce the message that global community does not tolerate the violation of human dignity and that these ideals are non-negotiable. But second of all, we think that this sends a strong message against impunity. The concept allows the continuance of sports washing, where the countries try to wash its image of the past of human rights abuses. For example, Russia tried to renew its image and make other oblivious of the past human rights abuses by hosting the Olympics, right? It is just true that many Olympics experience people addressing journalists, abusing labor forces, and oppressing the voice of civilians despite its purpose as a beacon for integrity and human rights. Allowing countries that commit crimes against humanity to compete without consequence would send a dangerous message. This force and international recognition can take precedence over justice and accountability. The global stage of Olympics should not be a platform for nations that have committed crimes and let them get away with it and attend something that can give them such high honors and recognition when they participate. The international community has a moral duty to ensure that such actions are met with the firm consequences, including exclusion from the crucial global events like the Olympics. But third of all, we think this respects the victims and upholds justice, right? When a country is guilty of crimes against humanity, the pain and suffering of the victims cannot be ignored. Allowing such a country to participate in the Olympics is an affront to those who have suffered and a failure to honor their memory. We think that it is our moral obligation, and we do have the incentive to stand in solidarity with these victims and ensure that their suffering is not going to be forgotten, right? We think that this argument is very important, as by banning countries guilty of crimes against humanity from competing, we uphold our moral responsibility to protect and promote these human rights. We send a clear and powerful message that the dignity of the human life is the most important thing, and if any country violates this, then they should not be allowed to participate later in one of the world's most celebrated events. We think that the integrity of the Olympics and its values represents that depend on our collective commitment to justice and humanity. Before I continue on my second argument, what's the PY?
You say that athletes can compete anyway, but then you also say that it's the best thing to ban these countries' athletes from competing entirely because it's not respectful to the victims. What is your stance? I'm so confused.
No, I'm not saying that the country's athletes should not compete. I'm saying that they should not represent their country and compete, right? You know, these athletes, they can still join another country, represent another country that did not violate these human rights. They should just not represent the country that has committed these crimes. Moving on to our second argument on upholding values of the Olympic Games. First, a few layers of analysis. First of all, we think this promotes peace and unity. The Olympics are a symbol of peace and unity, bringing together nations from around the world in a spirit of friendly competition. However, countries that commit crimes against humanity have acted in the direct opposition to these ideals, often engaging in violence, oppression, and division. Including these countries in the Olympics sends a message that actions are permissible, which undermines the game's roles in the force for global harmony. To truly promote peace and unity, these Olympics must exclude the people who perpetuate conflict and injustice, right? We think that, like, responding to the POI again, you can compete individually. You don't need to join another country as well. So we think that this person, they can still get some recognition. They don't have to support their own country. They also don't have to support another country. They can still compete individually. But secondly, we think that this also preserves the integrity of the games. The integrity of the Olympics depends on its adherence to its values. When we allow nations guilty of crimes to participate, we taint the games with a stain of their actions. The Olympics should be a celebration of what is best for humanity, not a platform of those who have violated the very principles the games are meant to embody, right? Upholding Olympic values means that ensuring only the people who respect and live by these principles can take part in this event. Third of all, we think that this inspires future generations, right? As Olympics, they inspire millions of people around the world. Everybody watches the Olympics, and especially young people, by showcasing the best of the human potential, both physically and morally. We think that permitting countries that violate human rights records to completely diminish this inspiration, right? It sends the wrong message to the world that the pursuit of the athletic glory can outweigh moral responsibility. We think that to maintain the Olympics as a source of a positive inspiration for these people and the community, we think that we must ensure that its participants and the country that participates reflects the values that we wish to instill its future generations. Why is this argument important? Because we think that by upholding Olympic values and excluding those who have violated the fundamental principles of respect and human dignity, we preserve the true purpose of the Olympics, right? Which is to celebrate the best of humanity and inspire a better world, and there's a more just world on our side, right? Why does opening government have a very big impact in this debate? First of all, we protect the people inside the country that violates their rights, right? They're still able to participate in the Olympics. They're not directly excluded from it, as they don't have to represent their country. They can still represent themselves or represent another country. They'll still get recognition. But secondly, we also protect the entire world as we support more unity, and we do not support these bad consequences that these countries choose to take. So for all these reasons, about proud to stand on opening government. Thank you.
Imagine if the Olympics, the beacon of hope and unity, are used as a weapon, a tool to punish entire nations for the crimes of a few. Picture the heartbreak of an athlete, someone who has trained for years, sacrificed countless hours, only to be told they cannot compete, not because of something they did, but because of the actions they had no control over. Imagine the loss, not just for the athlete, but for us all, as we are deprived of witnessing the incredible feats of human potential and the stories that inspire us all. So therefore, never so proud to oppose. Firstly, just a brief characterization. What our opponent has been saying is briefly these kind of athletes, their most important thing is that these athletes, they can actually represent other teams or other individuals or even other countries, but not representing their nations to get recognition in the Olympic Games. However, firstly, I want to tell you that this is actually a systematic failure of their point. Why? Firstly, the suggestion that athletes can compete independently outside their national teams fundamentally misunderstand the structure and also organization of the Olympics, because they're inherently designed around national representation. Independent participation is not a practical or feasible option because the logistical and also administrative structure hurdles required to allow athletes to compete independently, such as the need for separate systems of accreditations, scheduling, and participation. This would be monumental and also unmanageable. And the Olympics are organized with national teams in mind, and implementing in an independent athlete system would actually require a more complete overhaul of the current structure. Until there will be financial and support challenges for the athletes. If they were to compete independently, the Olympic Games involves significant financial backings, right? And also support from national sports organizations, including training facilities and sponsorship. And without the backing of their national teams, these athletes, they would struggle to secure the very crucial resources to compete at the highest level. So their point ignores the reality that many athletes, they rely heavily on their national organizations for logistical support, founding, and also infrastructure, which could be unavailable if they were to compete independently. So however, on our side, which will the scenario be? So the world remains inclusive and focused on the athletes rather than political decisions. Yeah, so wait a second. By not varying countries from the Olympics based on their crimes against humanity, we preserve the event's role as a global celebration of athletic achievement and also international unity. And this prevents the Olympics from becoming a political tool, ensure that the athletes are not penalized for the government's actions, and also maintain the focus on sportsmanship and also these relationships among nations. And before I move on to our arguments, yes, you are.
What will your side do to address the country's guilty crimes against humanity?
So yeah, I'll just explain that further. Like what you have is saying that these kind of crimes that are addressed by the countries. However, we just want to tell you that firstly, this is not directly linked to what the athletes are going to do. However, the Olympic Games, it is actually like a recognition of the athletes and also sportsmanship. So this is like it is actually unfair for them like to be accountable for the actions that they had no control over. And secondly, on our opponent side, these kind of actions can never be solved as well. Well, I'll prove to you later why through these like recognition and also sponsorship between different nations, actually these national relationships can be improved on our side. Now move on to our argument one is the Olympics as a platform for diplomacy and dialogue. So preventing countries from participating in the Olympics based on a record of crimes against humanity may seem like a strong stance, but it actually undermines the unique role that the Olympic play as a platform for diplomacy and also dialogue. Because the Olympics, they have historically served as an opportunity for nations, even those with strained relations, to come together under the banner of sportsmanship and also global unity. So by allowing the countries to participate regardless of their human rights records, the international community keeps open channels of communication that might otherwise be closed. Because the games, they have long been a unique platform where global tensions can be set aside. So for the sake of competition and mutual respect, for instance, during the Cold War, athletes from the United States and also the Soviet Union competed against each other, not as representatives of their government's like ideologies, but as sportsmen and sportswomen. And this engagement actually allowed for a form of soft diplomacy where people they could see beyond the political narratives back to them and appreciate the shared humanity of their supposed adversaries, and therefore solving like these inhumanity actions that our opponent has been mentioning. And furthermore, this game they serve as an important meeting ground for government officials and leaders from all around the world. And these interactions, often occurring behind the scenes, they can lead to significant diplomatic breakthroughs or at least provide a forum for dialogue. The presence of North and South Korean athletes merging together under a unified flag during 2018 Winter Olympics was a powerful symbol of potential reconciliation. And such moments could be impossible if the countries they were excluded just based on the human rights records, as it would actually eliminate one of the few platforms where these adversarial nations they can engage in dialogue under a global spotlight. Moreover, the exclusion of countries from the Olympics it might lead to unintended consequences, such as the deepening of nationalist sentiments and also discrimination within those countries. Because the governments that are isolated and overstressed, they may use this exclusion to bolster their narrative of victimhood and resistance against perceived global injustices. And this can make them less likely to engage in meaningful reforms or to cooperate with international human rights organizations. And such absence of these nations from the Olympics, they can also fuel resentment among their citizens, who may also view international communities' actions as unjust and also hypocritical, further entrenching divisions as a whole. Our argument too is the Olympics should remain apolitical. Why is that? Because one of the central tenets of the Olympic Charter is the principle of non-discrimination. So by enforcing a ban, no rejected. So by enforcing a ban on countries based on their political actions, the Olympics will violate this principle and set a dangerous precedent where those sports are used as a tool for political tools. And furthermore, this game they have a unique ability to unite people from diverse backgrounds, as I have been already saying. And this unity is achieved precisely because the Olympics they have remained largely apolitical. Athletes from all around the world, regardless of their government's actions or policies, are given the opportunity to showcase their talents on the global stage. And politicizing the Olympics by banning countries for crimes against humanity can create a slippery slope where the line between accessible and inaccessible actions become increasingly blurred. Why is that? Because what constitutes a crime against humanity can be subject to the interpretation and may be influenced by the political interests of powerful nations. And this can actually lead to inconsistent decisions about which country are allowed to participate, and further even eroding the credibility of the Olympics as a fair and also neutral event. And the politicization of such can lead to the fragmentation of the global sports community, as I have been saying, that it can actually weaken the global unity that the Olympics are meant to foster, and could result in the splittering of the international sports into competing factions, undermining the very purpose of the Olympics as a unifying force. And also, we track down the stakeholders to individuals, right? Because one of the most significant consequences of banning countries from participating is that the effectively punishing athletes who are often innocent of the crimes, since they it's unrealistic for them to participate in these games individually. So to deny them for the opportunity to compete because of the actions is a form of collective punishment that is both unfair and counterproductive. So therefore, for all the reasons we're never so proud to oppose. Thank you.
Before I start my speech, I would like to have 3 points of clarifications. First, we defend the status quo system of that Olympics operate on, and we would like to explain how this mechanism works again. We define crimes as first human rights abuses, second war crimes, third violating international agreements. The characteristics of these is first is resulting from the faults of a nation, and in situations where the nation is responsible, unlike what the opposition has said, where, for example, individuals commit crimes. We don't think that's as severe as holding the nation responsible, because obviously, if you have a murder in one country, that wouldn't result the entire country being banned from the Olympics. We think that this is a situation where the nation is responsible. But second piece of characterization is that we would like to say that these crimes are already previously established, right? So don't accept the subjective human rights claim on their side, because these situations are judged already by previously established international boundaries that countries are very clear that they have violated, right? For example, terrorism, we know that it's very clearly violating international law. But furthermore, we think that also war crimes are also previously established, and violating international agreements are also previously established, especially human rights abuses. We can all agree, for example, abusing women, domestic violence, or like harming their citizens and killing children directly. Those are all considered human rights abuses. Even if you think that there's some subjectivity, for example, if you think they have a legitimate reason for hurting women or killing children, then I think first of all they do get a platform for them to communicate, right? I think they still do have an international platform where they can have diplomatic arguments, where they can argue for their stance. But furthermore, if that's really the case, that they do this for no good reason, and the international spectrum does not realize these reasons, and I think it's still better if we don't allow them to participate, because the majority still think these are abusing human rights. But second of all, they said that independent participation is not feasible. Clearly, they have not watched the Olympics. There has been several gymnasts from Russia and Belarus that have participated in the recent Olympics despite their countries being banned from the Olympics. Clearly, this is a feasible option. Our opponents also tell us that they don't get the pride of representing their countries. However, we think this may feel better when they receive more positive comments, when they receive more positive commentary on how they chose to uphold justice. We think they still feel better in those cases. Third of all, they said the core of Olympics is non-discriminatory. What is discrimination, judges? False stereotypes and unfair, unjustified harms against people. We don't think that is what violating war crimes or abusing human rights are. It's for a legitimate reason. It's not a stereotype. But furthermore, on their arguments, first on serving as a soft diplomatic platform. First of all, this is non-unique. International bodies like the UN and diplomatic ties between countries already act as diplomatic platforms. We don't need the Olympics to do this. But second of all, we don't think we should bring political discussions onto the Olympics, because it makes diplomacy less effective, and it negatively affects the athletes that get tangled in as a result, when they no longer feel pride at representing their country, where they receive so many negative comments compared to them competing as an individual. On their second argument on how politics and sports should remain separated. First of all, I think the severity of international crimes is so big. Like when you slaughter and abuse innocent citizens, it means it applies in all contexts, and you can't just simply easily exclude it. But second of all, I think the Olympics is an international stage for the representation of a nation's forefront, and showcases the spirit of a nation, and is a channel for diplomacy, which means it's inseparable from politics in the first place. Or else, why do athletes parade in their traditional clothing? Why do they hold the flags of their country when they participate, right? Because athletes can compete in their own country, in their own name, or they can compete individually. However, when it comes to an international stage, athletes actually participate to win glory for their countries, even if don't personally commit crimes. They represent their nation in Olympics. They contribute to their nation's forefront in the Olympics. The crimes we're talking about here aren't just crimes committed by individuals, but rather the crimes that hold nations themselves responsible. That's why we think it's extremely crucial for these nations to be banned, because we don't want the nation's forefront to be glorified. Before I move on, I'll take your view.
Why is it that only the Olympic Committee is capable of regulating these human rights abuses, when literally there are specific courts that are dedicated to regulating human rights?
Yeah, obviously, you can regulate human rights in other ways. Our purpose right here is not to regulate human rights, but rather to uphold the integrity of the Olympic Games, right? Because the Olympic Games is the only platform we're talking about in this debate, which means that
it doesn't mean that if you have other it doesn't mean that if you have other sources of upholding justice means that you could just not care about the integrity of the Olympics, right? Because we're debating about the Olympics. Just because you have, for example, the World Cup doesn't mean that you shouldn't care about the Olympics. We still think that doesn't mitigate any of our impacts in the first place. But third of all, on what we have brought to you in this debate, we first gave you an argument on practically countries should be held responsible and scrutinized for the heinous crimes that they committed. We gave you several pieces of analysis. First, we have proven how the conflict allows the continuance of sports washing, where countries try to wash its image and pass of human rights abuses or war crimes. We think this is the truth because countries have every incentive to do this. For example, in the past, Russia has constantly tried to renew its image and make others oblivious to their past of human rights abuses by hosting the Olympics. This is the truth. So many Olympics where people are arrested on the ground, journalists to hide their actions. They take on a false pretense of what their country is like. They abuse the labor force to build a flashy appearance, and they also oppress the voices of civilians, despite the Olympic has a purpose of being a beacon for integrity and human rights, right? We think the impact of this is extremely bad because Olympics takes up such a big portion of the media, such a big portion of people's attention, that it's very easy for countries that just cover up their crimes in the forefront of, for example, citizens' minds, when the majority of social media is just talking about the Olympics, and where people actively hide their heinous actions behind the veil of hosting a perfect Olympics. We think this is extremely feasible because in the past it has been so. The second argument we have brought to the table is that it principally violates the purpose of Olympics and taints the values that the Olympics should uphold. This means it has no relationship with any other, for example, global courts, because it is about the Olympic principles itself. It's supposed to be It's supposed to uphold integrity. If you allow criminals to attend the Olympics, then that's not upholding the integrity that the Olympics value so much as a beacon for integrity and human rights for the entire world, right? We think it's such an international platform that we can't allow criminals to stain its integrity. Thus, practically and morally, we win this debate. Vote for OG.
In this debate, the most contentious issue revolves around whether the countries found guilty of crimes against humanity should be barred from participating in the Olympics. The government argues the exclusion upholds the values and integrity of the Olympic Games and deters moral breaches by sending a strong message. However, we contend that such exclusion is impractical, unjust to athletes, and fails to address the root issues effectively. Additionally, the existence of international courts already tasked with handling such crimes suggests that the Olympics may not be the appropriate platform for these punitive measures. Therefore, we will examine the feasibility of exclusion, its impact on athletes, and propose alternative ways to address human rights violations without undermining the Olympic spirit as the opposition in the following minutes. Our first clash today is on the feasibility of exclusion. The government proposes that the countries guilty of crimes against humanity should be barred from Olympics, but allows the athletes from these nations to compete under a neutral flag, which means that they do not represent their country. However, we tell you that this model is unfeasible due to the logistical complexities and the inherent nationalistic nature of the Olympic Games. So therefore, even if we use our opponent's model, we tell you that it has very little effects because in people's minds, they will definitely still perceive this athlete as a member of that country. So therefore, there's actually little effect of this model that our opponents propose. The Olympics are deeply rooted in a national representation, and removing this aspect disrupts the core essence of the competition too. Moreover, the neutral flag approach will likely result in a loss of national pride and coherence, diminishing the overall impact and quality of the event. This clash addresses the practicality of implementing the government's proposal. While the government aims to uphold Olympic values through exclusion, we tell you that this approach is impractical and detrimental to the Games tradition. We recognize the need to address human rights abuses, but argue that excluding entire nations is impractical and counterproductive. The Olympic Games are a celebration of national talent and unity, and the proposed model disrupts this tradition without effectively addressing the issue. Additionally, international courts such as the International Criminal Court, ICC, already handle crimes against humanity. These legal institutions are specifically designed to deal with such issues, providing a much more appropriate venue for justice. A more feasible approach involves targeted measures that address human rights violations while preserving the Olympic spirit. So therefore, I tell you, if we simply implement this motion, the status quo could be even worse, because we tell you that the Olympic Games has been served as a diplomatic platform for dialogue throughout history. Therefore, if we exclude nations and politicize the Olympic Games, it will make the outcome even worse because it will make the international relationship have more tension even more. And here now's the way. The opposition's approach is more practical and respects the Olympic tradition. Why? The government's exclusion model risks undermining the essence of the games and does not offer a viable solution to address human rights abuses. However, our approach ensures that games continue to celebrate athletic excellence while addressing issues through targeted measures that do not harm the athletes. Furthermore, by leveraging existing international legal mechanisms, we ensure that justice is served without disrupting global sporting events. Now we're on to Clash 2, Impact on Athletes. The government argues that excluding countries sends a message about moral responsibility and protects athletes by allowing them to compete as neutrals. However, this approach unfairly penalizes athletes who are not responsible for their government's actions. These athletes should not be deprived of their opportunity to compete due to their country's actions. Instead, they should be given a chance to participate and showcase their talents without being implicated in their government's wrongdoing. We contend that athletes should not be held accountable for the actions of their governments. The exclusion of entire countries from the Olympics unjustly punishes athletes who have worked hard to achieve their dreams. Instead, we propose alternatives such as targeted sanctions against specific individuals responsible for human rights violations. This approach ensures that athletes are not unfairly penalized and maintains the integrity of Olympic Games as a platform for showcasing talent and sportsmanship. Therefore, by preserving the opportunity for athletes to compete, we uphold fairness and ensure that the focus remains on athletic excellence rather than politics, which can be solved using other legal mechanisms. So before I move on, I take your POI.
Why are the 4 years that the athletes lose far worse than the years innocent civilians need to see their place where they called home be bombed?
Sorry, I don't quite understand your question. So are you trying to make a comparison between like the athletes and the other innocent people? So like firstly, we tell you that the athletes, they do not have direct relationship of the wrongdoings of their governments. We say that they should not be penalized just because their government did something wrong. And secondly, we tell you that even if you think it's unjust for these innocent citizens, we'll tell you that there are other mechanisms, other legal mechanisms that can already solve these problems. And adding Olympic Games into this mechanism will simply exacerbate the status quo. So now beyond to Wei, we tell you that the opposition's approach is more just and equitable. Why? The government's proposal unfairly punishes athletes, while our approach focuses on addressing human rights abuses through targeted measures that do not harm innocent individuals. By ensuring that athletes can compete without being implicated in their government's actions, we still preserve the core values of the Olympic Games and uphold fairness. Our approach leverages existing mechanisms to address the root cause of human rights violations while maintaining the integrity of the Games. Now we on to our final clash, effectiveness of the approach. The government claims that excluding countries from the Olympics will deter human rights abuses and promote accountability. However, we tell you that this approach will not be effective in addressing the root causes of these abuses. Countries may still engage in human rights violations despite exclusion, and the focus on the Olympics as a platform for political statements will not lead to meaningful change. We propose that We propose that addressing human rights abuses requires more comprehensive and targeted measures beyond the realm of sports. Instead of using Olympics as a platform for political statements, we advocate for diplomatic and economic sanctions that directly target those responsible for human rights violations. This approach ensures that pressure is applied where it is most needed and is more likely to lead to meaningful change. The focus should be on creating systemic improvements rather than simply relying on the Olympics to serve as a moral battleground. Existing international courts are designed to handle such issues and should be utilized to address human rights abuses effectively. Yes, POI.
Why can't you have normal political statements together with banning them from Olympics? Why are they mutually exclusive?
Okay, so we tell you that, firstly, we tell you that it won't be having a meaningful change if you apply this to the Olympics, as we have already told you that there are more direct mechanisms such as economic and diplomatic sanctions, which have a much more significant impact. However, if you apply this in the Olympics, it doesn't have a much impact, and also it would exacerbate the situation even more. So now beyond Wei, we tell you that the opposition approach is more likely to lead to effective change. The government's focus on exclusion may not address the root causes of human rights abuses and risks undermining the Olympic spirit. Our approach emphasizes targeted measure and diplomacy, leveraging existing legal institutions to promote accountability and address these underlying issues. Therefore, by using the proven mechanisms for justice, we ensure that the response to human rights violations is both effective and respectful of the Olympic tradition. So therefore, Judge, for all the reasons above, please retire. Thank you.
think the opening half of this debate really misses out on the core of this debate. They don't get this. When we tell you that the most important thing is human rights violation, the only one who actually contends on this is the DLO. The only thing they say is about how there's diplomatic approaches, which they don't even talk about. We don't understand what the opening is trying to do. But let me give some extra mechanizations and extensions to add on to our OG, right? Then let me actually characterize what violence against humanity actually looks like and how that is so problematic and why that is only exclusive, why the benefit we get is only exclusive in Olympics. Before that, what are the metrics for CG's path to victory? Firstly, if we prove uniquely why we get the best deterrents for more sustainable deterrents, we win. But secondly, if we prove why these topics weigh over athletes, we again still win. Then going on to characterizing violence against humanity, right? It's about basically starting wars. This kills millions of people. Look at the Israel-Hamas war. It literally killed a bunch of people. Again, the Ukraine-Russia war, it basically went for almost 3 years or something. This kills a lot of people. We have violence against humanity is a really big subject that no opening bench really wants to tend about. Secondly, on right violation, this destroys workers' rights into terrible conditions they need to work in, for just building a stadium, for just working in their country to make the agriculture of their country better, just paying these workers really low just for the purpose of these Olympics. So we believe that at the end of the day, using the platform Olympics is just in this way, but secondly, this is its only way as it's the largest audience and it can actually get the most pressure. Because sure, we do agree that courts get somewhat of awareness inside country, but it really does not happen to the normal people outside of this one country in the global society. We want everyone to know this, and especially casual viewers as well, because that's the most amount of people that exist in the globe, right? We want the most amount of people to get awareness on this issue and cause pressure, and that's how solvency happens. But B, it represents cooperation. Olympics represent cooperation, and that's exactly why Olympics is the only way, because we don't want countries who reduce cooperation to compete in the Olympics. But C, this is the biggest awareness, right? And like I told you, the median viewers are the ones who actually need to know about this and create political change by lobbying towards the governments, and the rich people lobbying for the government to change because they don't want to get global embarrassment, because they still want to see their country playing, and that's the biggest drive for why these people are most likely to lobby in our side, and that is the only way, and Olympics are the only way in our side we prove the burden that for some reason OO sets for us. We prove this burden, right? Then going on to rebutting the OO and then going on to extensions, right? The O says two things. Firstly, mainly on athletes, and secondly, on platform for politics is really bad. Firstly, on athletes, we're taking the hard stance and tell you athletes are somewhat worse in our side. We do agree. But what's the trade-off here? The trade-off is humanity violation cannot be solved in OO. And whatever CO says, these countries either A, do not know what the problem is, secondly, do not acknowledge the problem with their actions, but C, just ignore it because there's no backlash, even if courts do happen. What CO does, what CG does is twofold. A, we embarrass them in global community. Secondly, we take away what the citizens crave. These creates three things. Firstly, governmental action. Secondly, narratives inside the country. And thirdly, outside pressure. It's sad that athletes cannot represent their country or just can't do sports as a whole. But we believe that direct solvency of thousands of people dying in the Israel-Hamas war, A, outweighs in quantity, B, outweighs value, but C, Olympics is the only way, right? So, and these reasons, we outweigh the case of athletes. But secondly, on the platform for politics is bad. A, where politics is talked about in their side. Because firstly, there's going to be discourse in media, oh, why did Israel join the Olympics? Or why did Russia join the Olympics? That is so bad. But secondly, on conflict and value fragmentation, right? There's going to be conflict between these two countries if they meet up each other in Olympics, so there's still going to be conflict, and there's going to be value fragmentation as well. The value of Olympics in itself is what the top bench really wants to talk about, but we engage on this and say that it's not in the value of Olympics to bring in the people who destroyed cooperation. This is just value fragmentation, and B, the meaning of Olympics, which is peace. We believe that platform of politics is bad. Somewhat it might be bad, but we believe that the trade-off outweigh here. Before we going on to our extensions, sure, I'll take that PY.
Why is it that we can't have any other things such as human rights courts to regulate human rights abuses?
I literally said that for the last 1 minute and my first 1 minute. 4 responses. A is the only way as it's the largest audience. You get the most awareness in our side because people don't care about court results, and these people don't know about court results. The median people in global society do not know about the court results. See, if it's just one country in their inside creating pressure, that might not be enough because some governments are just too powerful. But if the global society just pressures on you as an extra layer, it is really certain that these governments are more likely to change in our side. That is the main mechanism I talked about for already 2 minutes in my 5-minute speech. I don't understand what that POI was. Then going on to extensions about why deterrence is in our side. For example, status quo in citizens inside the country, especially the rich, do not know about these violations, but more likely they don't care about these violations. They don't care, Judge, because for example, in the Russian-Ukraine war, sure, they just want more land, and the support for Putin actually increased. The Russian citizens actually like what happened, but when their entertainment, their chance to show their country's pride and strength gets stopped because of the violation of humanity rights, that's when A, they want to stop the problem. This is also why Olympics is the only way. But B, even if not, they would at least give more attention because that's the reason why your country cannot go out into this national event. See, when the people have backlash of their players losing one and only chances, and also their country getting embarrassed by the whole global society, that is when people care. They lobby the government and they try to get rid of the problem. This is a solvency, Judge. More outside pressure in media, bad social narratives form about your country, and that is when governments want to change. That is when citizens want to lobby the government, and that is why and that is when the whole global society pressures on these people to change. But D, global attention, everyone notices, especially using media. This spreads fast. E, we provide solvency, unlike OG, on why deterrence is just more likely to happen in our side, and why Olympics is the only way. Secondly, on victims, A, they don't care about their countries at this point. They want, firstly, huge backlash and retribution because these are big issues, right? They want big issues to happen about their country, and that's how they want to solve their problem. That's how they want to get retribution, right? This is the biggest thing for victims. But secondly, future crimes not happening. They don't want to get crimes done to them again. They want sustainable, less crimes. B, we bring justice then. And even if we do not fulfill the burden of sustainability, at least we try to get attention. At least we build mechanisms for this country to not further do human rights violations. This is just a clear win for victims because victims are gonna like our side better because is at the point where the country who violated your humanity rights cannot go to the Olympics and gets global embarrassment. That's what the victim wants. See, this is differentiation from OG because OG is the principal rights. We give you stakeholder analysis of the vulnerable. So proud to be on CG.
Side proposition can stand on their moral high horse all they want, but the point is that these nations will only ban these countries that don't give them a geopolitical incentive because of the fact that the Olympic Committee, in the end of the day, is still profit incentivized, is still incentivized by their nation, and by the incentives of their nation. So proud to oppose. Few things I'm going to do in today's speech. Firstly, rebut the entire government bench, prove why they cannot stand or cannot possibly win in this debate. Secondly, some points on reframing. Thirdly, our extension about double standards and polarization and why this is such a bad thing. Let's move on to rebuttals then. Firstly, on OG's main point on responsibility, 2 things. Firstly, this does not help anyway. They literally put a piece of framing in their speeches by saying, athletes can still compete, and they literally conjecture themselves in the very next breath by saying, pain and suffering victims can't be ignored, so they shouldn't compete. What is their stance? I'm so confused. This is so convoluted and confusing. I literally don't understand this. But even if they say that you go to another nation, like these countries are likely to profit and capitalize off of this anyway, because Putin can just claim, look, it's a Russian athlete, they won the Olympics, therefore this thing doesn't stand. But however, even if this wasn't true, this literally doesn't work for a few reasons. Firstly, it's hard to move to another nation. Most of the time you have to spend the time that you have to spend in a nation to become a citizen that is at least a few years, which means that you can't simply move and just leave the country. But second, people compete because of an inherent sense of patriotism, therefore you de-incentivize people to an even greater extent. Secondly though, let's move on to their point about how you exclude those who perpetuate a conflict and that injustice is principally justified. What do we know? The point is that if you ban these nations, you ban a host of talented athletes. Note that the people who compete in the Olympics are completely detached from the government. The government is the one who did something wrong, not the athletes. If I am a Russian citizen, that doesn't mean that I actively support Putin's crimes in Ukraine. It just means I happen to be born in a state that was accused of human rights abuses. Thirdly though, note that Russia also helped raise athletes who won gold in the Olympics when Russia was literally not allowed to compete there. This proves that their policy doesn't work and that it's just toothless anyway. But fourthly then, let's talk about conflict in the Olympics and value fragmentation and meaning, which is their main push from their side. Even if we consider this to be true, let's weigh this against athletes and fairness. Olympics are meant to be fair above all else. They're meant to be a fair competition and they're not supposed to be politically incentivized. That's the thing with all sports. All sports aren't supposed to be politically incentivized. The point of sports is a fair playing ground. We think opening already characterizes this to enough, but we'll explain it more in our speech. Even if we weigh this against some sort of value fragmentation on our side of the house, on their side of the house, we think that it's worth it anyway if there is some fragmentation to an extent, because at least we get to uphold the standard of the Olympics being fair. Fourthly, then, they said that the only way to regulate these human rights abuses in the Olympics, people read the news, people know that Russia invaded Ukraine, people know that Israel is creating harms for Palestine and the status quo, and abusing people in Palestine because there's something called the news. People aren't living under a rock. People literally they want to know about society, and since news is so easily accessible, though this isn't the only way to know that people that they're committing human rights abuses on their side of the house. We think that there are more effective ways to punish them that doesn't just have to do with punishing the innocent athletes. Moving on to framing then. So who's going to decide whether a nation is guilty or not? I'll take you after framing, because clearly OG doesn't understand this. The people who set the standard are the Olympic Committee. This means that the standards of human rights abuses are going to be incredibly biased towards geopolitical interest. For example, the US has committed several war crimes, but the Olympic Committee doesn't want to ban them because of the fact that they're geopolitically valuable. We think that this just looks like pure hypocrisy. But secondly though, how are we going to punish these nations? And this is a huge question to debate. There are other ways to punish people for human rights abuses. Note that there are already such things as a human rights and an international court in which countries have committed war crimes and tried and found guilty or innocent, and they get more repercussions with this, for example, trade blocks and other things. Plus, you have other committees to deal with this. The Olympic Committee are sportsmen and not politicians. We want it to remain that way. So how do we win this debate? Both opposition teams' fatal error is the fact that they assume that we cannot have both geopolitically sound and fair ways to police human rights abuses and allow innocent athletes to compete. If we can prove that the comparative of opposition is worse, we automatically win the debate. But also, note that if we use their logic on how human rights abusers are always human rights abusers, this means that they'll punish people to the day for abuses that happened in the far past. This means that if I'm German, I can't compete because of something my government did 70 plus years ago. That literally doesn't make any sense. And that means that most of the countries are going to be boxed out of the Olympics in their award anyway. Before I move on to my extension, sure.
Like you said, as a Russian, I literally did nothing, and my country cannot go to the Olympics because of my government. Who am I gonna be mad at, and who am I gonna pressure at?
Yeah, well, even if you're mad, we okay, sure. Even if we can see the point that you're going to be mad at the government, the point is that you're still banning the athlete from competing. That's principally unjustified. We think that OG already weighs this enough in their speeches. We think that we don't need to provide this extra weighing and restate this extra weighing for you. Moving on to our extension then about how this creates double standards and polarization. Let's move on to the premise of this argument then. Note that determining which countries are guilty of human rights abuses and should therefore be banned from the Olympics is highly subjective and could lead to inconsistencies or double standards. Different countries and international bodies have different varying criteria for what constitutes as a human rights abuse, leading to politicized and a very selective enforcement. This can result in countries being unfairly targeted while others with simply worse records remain unpunished, thus compromising the fairness and impartiality of the games. But even if this wasn't true, we're going to prove to you why this doesn't solve the root cause and why we think that this is going to cause spillover and tensions in other parts as well. Let's move on to the mechanization then. Firstly, on how they don't solve the root cause. History has shown us that when politics and sports mix, there's significantly controversy and division. For example, in the 1980 Moscow Olympics, they were marred by large-scale boycott led by the United States in protest against the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. In response, the Soviet Union and its allies boycotted the 1984 Los Angeles Olympics. These boycotts did not resolve the underlying political issues and only served to deprive athletes of their chance to compete while also dividing the Olympic community. This leads to more fragmentation and more polarization on their side of the house. A few reasons why we think this is likely. Firstly, this looks like a fragmentation in the Olympic Committee. We think this would look like in the Cold War when the Soviet Union and its allies organized the Friendship Games in response to their boycott of the 1984 Los Angeles Olympics, which means that there will be large fragmentation on their side. However, second, there's an incentive for this to spill over into other sectors. For example, in the 1984 Olympics, since the Soviet Union boycotted the US Games, this led to further tension between the two nations. We also think it would rather look like the 1988 Seoul Olympics, which were intended to serve as a symbol of peace and reconciliation. However, tensions between the two Koreans were heightened as North Korea refused to participate in the games, and they also coupled this with allegations that the South was trying to use the event for political gain, which further entrenched economic and political divisions on the Korean peninsula. We think that the situation on their side of the house is going to look more like this. But second, why are double standards such a bad thing? If they want to sit on their moral high horse and tell us that people who commit human rights abuses should be banned, however, note that there is an incentive to the actor. The incentive actor, which is the Olympic Committee, is only likely to block countries that are not geopolitically likely to affect them. Note that this means that not all people who commit human rights abuses are going to be weighed equally on their side, which means that even in their best case scenario, where this policing still happens and people don't get mad, it's still unjustified for them to weigh one over the other. So let's do some weighing then. We prove that there's a spillover on a societal level compared to OO, whose points are simply about sports, and on OG. But we prove why all nations are likely to be banned, and why this will lead to a less good quality Olympics, because of the fact that you're punishing the people of a nation for things they did ultimately years ago and weren't done because of them and weren't done by them. For all of these reasons, never been prouder to stand on closing opposition.
Panel, the most vulnerable people in this debate are not the ones excluded from the games. It's the ones that are getting bombed in the war field, the ones that are getting forced and dragged into war, the ones that are killed by ones with authority, the ones that they don't get the sound of cheer, but rather the sound of the place where they called home being bombed. At the point where OO and CO does not mention any ways how they could stand against human rights violations, they immediately lose out this debate. Because we tell you, the least amount we could do is stand with these victims. The ones that we say we even get rid of the culture if it means we at least promote peace on our side. Before moving on to the clashes, I want to just point out our differentiation from OG. Because what's our differentiation from OG? Note that OG's argument is centered around moral obligation, that the Olympics needs to support peace and unity, and their impact is centered on the Olympics, and how they can gain more support because they follow their core standard by the public. Our differentiation is the impact of the support that they leave off on. Our extension is that when we ban countries from playing, we show that we stand with the victims. We show that we notice their suffering and we address it, not because of the support that we get from the Olympics, but because we mention the harms of what's going on in the status quo. That when we ban a country, people search for that reason why they were banned, and when we ban a country, we show that we are supporting the ones in war. But then before moving on to the clashes, I just want to point out how Steele just tries to mess up this debate for no reason. They say that for some reason that every country has a humanitarian violation, hence every country might be banned. No, we tell you that this is not true. That what we mean by humanitarian violation is that what you're doing right now, i.e., if you're doing war crimes in the Gaza Strip, or if you're doing war crimes in Ukraine, that's when you get banned. Not that your history or whatnot. Otherwise all countries will be banned. It's about currently. Now let's go on to the clash. The main clash is which side provides solvency. OO's strategy is to mention that sports and politics don't have any impact and should be differentiated. And the impact of this is how you only harm the athletes. But then first, I want to mention how sports and things do have an impact. Because first, in their own logic, these athletes won't do anything harmful. Then I don't get why these countries would would fight in the first place, especially when in their own logic, because the athletes are innocent, they should be able to go. But then if their argument is literally about that how they would have tensions inside the stadium, that means the athletes are going to do something harmful if that premise does exist. That means this is a contradiction on their side, which further explains why we should ban the countries. But then secondly, we mentioned how we won't do this because on our side, this fight wouldn't happen in the first place because they aren't fighting under a single nationality. Therefore, they're not representing a country. So we do accept that they are somewhat innocent. The athletes didn't do anything, but then that we still mitigate this harm because they're fighting under a different nationality that they're still competing under the games. But then second, when they mention that these countries will start a backlash, I don't get why this justifies why we shouldn't ban countries then. Because if they're going to leave anyways, we should probably just make sure that they leave 100%, not that because they leave we shouldn't do anything about it. That's not a rebuttal. That's just explaining a case about even of an if scenario. This rebuttal ultimately does not stand. But then third, what's our justification? Please note that the Olympics have billions of youth worldwide, that the ones that we are able to help, that we tell you are the most vulnerable, that when we tell you that they don't give you any alternatives, as we mentioned in the POI, from opening and all the way from closing opposition, we tell you that when they don't give any Olympics, the reason why specifically Olympics is because it's the best way to gain support or the emotional support to the most vulnerable, and there aren't better alternatives. Because Jaehoon explicitly told you, and there's no response coming from Eliana, that first, given by how when we take them to court, you're gonna make them a lot more bloody, or the humanitarian right a lot more bloody, because by giving them weapons to the vulnerable, or taking their money or sanctions or whatnot, you force the war to become worse because you put them them in harsher situations where they cannot help their innocent soldiers that were forced to kill what you call your enemy by the authorities. Ultimately, that means the funding from these innocent soldiers that are forced to fight each other are going to be a lot worse. The war is going to be a lot more violent. But then secondly, we tell you and mention how we get solvency because this forces public backlash. That when Russia could not represent their country and could not happen, the public has an internal backlash where additionally from a global embarrassment, you are also enraged with that your favorite player or your favorite event is locked out because you won't represent a country. We tell you it forces an internal change as you get the external pressure. You mentioned this in the POI that because you're mad that your favorite player cannot actually be like thing. We gave you an extension. We accepted that people are going to be bad, but who will they be mad to? These are the authorities. This forces internal pressure to either stop the humanitarian rights or to actually pressure them in some way to reduce this amount. We're able to gain change on our side. This is far better than what they have because they provide nothing and they don't extend on why the alternatives do exist. So the only case that we actually see is basically about how like these players cannot actually get the opportunity. First, understand that our opening already said that they can still play in ROC, that the Russian Olympic community. This is beneficial because we get rid of their flag and replace it to an Olympic flag. That doesn't mean that we disrespect doesn't mean that we disrespect the vulnerable because we allow these players to play, but then we also get rid of the flag that has traumatized the vulnerable, the ones that have been bombed, by showing them the representation that we also support with them. Their only case is basically about how like these athletes are going to be locked out. But what's the weighing over here? Please note that we were able to mention the most vulnerable stakeholders in this debate, that we're able to show them that we actually support them and stand alongside them by getting rid of these flags. But secondly, we were also able to mention that because of how we're able to actually stop them from actually playing, because of how we were actually able to like stop all the support, we were able to gain more support on our side. That's the weighing that you have to make. So 4 years of, for example, like practicing, which you can do after 4 years when the humanitarian is over, versus years and years of seeing your home being bombed, your loved ones being bombed. We were able to win because of how we tell you that they're most vulnerable, and we were able to actually take this clash because of how we were able to tell you that the amount of harm, the amount of magnitude that these most vulnerable people get when they see their people getting bombed is far worse than the amount of 4 years that you had from like your sweat or whatnot. Because the difference is that these people are shedding blood while these athletes are shedding sweat. That's what matters. But then compare this over to OG. How are we able to win? Number one, we were able to, how we proved to it, we have the most vulnerable stakeholders, the ones that are losing their homes, the ones that are losing their loved ones, that we were able to actually fulfill them and show them that we were supporting them by getting rid of these humanitarian violating countries on our side. But then secondly, we were also able to have solvency, because note that the OG just mentions that we get support, and it's only from the Olympics. Apart from the vulnerable that they literally lock out and hence box themselves in this debate because they don't get any sort of actual change and whatnot, we're able to tell you we have public backlash, that when we force that external pressure, and Eliana concedes this and opposition concedes this because of their own argument is contingent on the fact that you'll get mad. Ultimately, that means you will have external pressure as the government doing humanitarian violations because of how your public is mad at you that your favorite event is locked out and your favorite players are locked out. Ultimately, we were the only side that gets solvency. We were the only side that benefits the vulnerable. Very proud to be on side closing government. Thank you.
If my school's principal kills a person, I can't go to debate competitions, I can't apply for WSEC, and I can't live my dream. This exactly what happens on their side. They restrict people just because of something that they didn't do in the first place. They lose the value of their talent. Two things in my speech: the principle of this debate and the end outcome of which side is better. Let's begin with the principle. All they give you on OG is justice. I think the OG boxes them out of the debate from her first word, that her framing is that not the athletes in the country can compete at all. This one piece of framing without any explanation just brings down all of their benefits. The problem is with that, if they move countries, A, this simply isn't easy as they can say a word to it. The process that the people do are far more worse than on their side. But B, also you receive backlash within the country itself because you abandon the country and move to another. But see, Eliana already tells you that Russia didn't go to as a country itself, but their athletes winning the Olympics, they simply take the fall and they have a parade about it. Their side does nothing to solve the problem. They just harm the individual by making no change. But simply, OG is so uncharitable with their framing that we don't know what even happens on their side. I think CG also tries to extend on it, but they don't give us a clear framing at all. If we take the most amount of framing that we can get from their side of government, does that mean that if the country get a certain human rights violation from 1929 still gets banned from the Olympics, they don't pay to us what their world looks like, but let us be the only charitable team and engage with all all of the cases. First of all, it's also from historical misdeeds. We tell you that this is simply going to lessen the number of people that competed in the Olympics because of the fact that these nations are still among a country itself, as like a 1692 mistake is still remembered by society. We say that most countries contributed these types of war at some point, meaning they exclude most of the country and the quality of the Olympics just goes down. But second of all, let me be more charitable and take the more charitable case and say that it's some kind of thing like within 5 years, we say that it still doesn't save the benefits because they simply can just go back and participate in the Olympics again and they see the flag again. I don't know what they get from the benefit this is. They just exclude the people that are having the harms on their side of the case. B, but that they still have the disadvantage just because of misdeed that the country did. They still have to take the responsibility of something that they didn't even do in the first place. We'd say that this is a direct harm that only happens on their side of the case. So the only premise they have in this debate, the only premise that the whole government bench, including CG, only has is that they're going to punish these countries. They simply make Olympics into a matter of politics. We tell you that this has nothing to do with associated with politics in the first place. If you want to solve the misdeeds of the country itself, you have different ways by punishing them. I don't understand why they want it to be the Olympics. OG and CG doesn't prove to you why this is the best way that they can use, which means we automatically. But second of all, then is about inspiring future generations. Okay, OG comes up with this really weird point, and then they somehow realize that it's very weird, so they drop it from their second speaker. But first of all, they simply don't inspire future generations. We still do that on our side of the house because people that become athletes in the first place is because they want to become an athlete looking at the Olympic Games. But second of all, if they want to inspire future generations, they shouldn't simply exclude their countries itself. That means that they're on their side, they simply negatively influence the actors from these future generations, from the certain countries that made mistake with humanity. If their side wants to win on the majority, then they have to explain to us why this doesn't harm the people of the country that's morally wrong. The future generations in the country think that they aren't going to be able to go to the Olympics because of the fact that the country did something bad in the past. But before I move on, I'll take a POI, preferably from opening.
You don't represent your principal when you come to this debate competition. You individually compete. Why isn't this parallel for Olympics?
The problem with your side is that you make Olympics into a matter of politics. Even if my analogy doesn't work, you still make people compete in the Olympic Games without having a nation, without having anything that they can represent. But even if we say that maybe they represent something and maybe they don't have these types of nation and maybe our example doesn't work, but we tell you that even if they don't represent, your benefits itself are symmetric because of the fact that they take again the nation on again, and because there's an example about Russia having a parade about these types of individuals that wasn't about Russia in the first place. This is the direct example that contributes to your case because of the fact that they take the recognition on these types of things. Russia has the parade and the athletes are the ones that did it in different types of countries. We say that doesn't make your benefit any better. So the premise that CG has in this debate is that they get deterrence. The problem with their case is that they talk about deterrence from their first speaker and say that that's a delta to win the debate, but they don't tell us anything about deterrence. What their solution doesn't match the part of deterrence in the first place. What they tell you or what they don't disagree on and follow the OG's framing and said they can simply just move if they have a problem. That means I said chat POIs. That means that even in the side of the country won't care about it because they just tell the athletes that they can move countries on their side of the case. That means that they don't get deterrence, but even if we take the part of the deterrence argument they have, we achieve a better solvency of the problem itself on human rights, because if that's the main goal, rather than the Olympics that the athletes also get a harm, we rather want them to solve problems in different ways that give them more deterrence because we give a direct impact to them. The government also tells you that they say that countries are very clear. Some countries like violated the crimes. That means the country still has these types of harm on your side of the case, which is rather bigger because you give the harm to a lot of people and the majority. They say they impact the vulnerable, but I don't get why they even impact the vulnerable in the first place, because we think that the vulnerable sectors are a different part of the debate. But also, if we engage on this, these athletes that work 4 years of their life just because they wanted to go to the Olympics, they have their career, but they still don't go to the Olympics because their country has a war. I don't know how they help these people in the first place. The main of the Olympics itself is the people who compete here. If you get this little small benefit called cooperation, they call it, we say cooperation doesn't happen on your side anyway, because these people simply don't exclude these people from games or don't cooperate with these people, but they simply tell them and actually have the games with them that tells them the sense of community itself. If what they want is cooperation, and if they simply segregate the people from each other because of their country's wrong, it's simply unjustified. But let's take their victim analysis about how people suffer. I don't think that if they want to solve the problem, they need a different runway. We tell them that they harm even more people on their side of the case. We tell you two things. First of all, that we shouldn't punish the victims in any way. But second of all, there are better of ways, but also third of all, they put the countries themselves into more tension that make the victims and the wars far worse off on their side of the case because of the fact that they didn't get a part in the Olympics. That's the exact harm that happens on their side. If they try to even benefit the victims on their side of the case, it doesn't work. Then why do we win over OO? We tell you exclusively two things. First of all, that they don't provide us a solution. They don't give us mechanism on why it's better off on their side of the case. But second of all, we give you an exclusive benefit on our side that Eliana talks about. There's that we have more polarization in the country itself, but also has a high rise on a high horse. But also it causes more tension within the Olympics because they decide that certain countries that can or cannot compete in the Olympics itself. If they want the country to cooperate, it's not the solution to stop them from competing and just segregate them even more on their side of the case. We give them a better chance. We give you something that additional, which makes CG take this debate home. We say that it's more likely for these victims on our side to be happier because first of all, we don't create more tension within countries by segregating some types of countries, but also second of all, we help the second vulnerable people that CG talks about the athletes in the first place. We don't give them a harm. We give them the chance to actually compete in the Olympics, which is principally justified on our side of the case because they aren't the people that did this type of wrong. CG takes this debate.